There you go. We're live. Let us begin. Yes. Okay. Mawagi 666. Does the moon get hit by the stuff we go through during meteor showers? Absolutely. The Earth and the moon are moving together through the solar system, and together they are passing through the tail of a comet. And that's really what meteor showers are, is that every time a comet comes through the solar system and orbits around the sun, it leaves a trail of particles. And so there are these tails, these trails that are left behind from the various comets all in our vicinity. And because we pass through the tail at the same time every year, like I don't want to make it feel like there's like a tail behind the comet, that the comet leaves a trail, it deposits debris as it's moving along its orbit. And so the Earth and the moon pass through this trail of debris at roughly the same time every year. And that's why we get the Perseids in August, we get the Leonids in November, and we get the Geminids in December. That the Earth-Moon system passes through them at the same time. Now, on the Earth, we have the atmosphere. And so we see meteors as these streaks of light passing through the sky as they are burning up in the atmosphere. But the moon has no atmosphere, or no appreciable atmosphere. And so the particles hit the surface. Nothing slows them down. And they're going 20 to 70 kilometers per second when they hit the surface of the moon, and will kick up a tiny little bit of debris. And the regolith that we see on the moon, this powdery material that's on the surface of the moon, that comes from billions of years of meteorites of varying sizes crashing. That comes from meteors of various sizes crashing into the surface of the moon, churning it up into smaller and smaller pieces. And so the same thing that we're getting on the Earth is happening on the moon, except that on the moon, you wouldn't see a meteor shower. You would just see a little puff of regolith as something hit the surface of the moon going 20 kilometers per second. And I'm sure you're thinking, like, well, what if that hit you? And the answer is, it depends on the size. If it was very small, it might get fully absorbed by the spacesuit. But if it was a little bit bigger, it might go through the spacesuit, might go through your body. Bigger ones might just explode you. So that is definitely a concern. And what's interesting is that this, for the longest time, there's a bit of a mystery about whether or not we could actually perceive flashes on the moon coming from objects that were crashing into the moon. And so there was this thing called transient lunar phenomena, where astronomers reported that they saw these flashes coming from the moon, but they were so rare, and in many cases they were doing this with visual astronomy, and that nobody was able to confirm that this was a thing. And now we have regular observations of the moon. People are able to catch these all at the same time. And there was actually an event that I was a part of, was in 2019, during a lunar eclipse. A friend of mine and I, we were live streaming the eclipse here on YouTube, my friend Corey Schmitz. And during that event, there was a larger object hit the surface of the moon. I don't know how big it was, about a meter maybe. And it caused a flash. And we didn't notice at the time. We were chatting. We weren't looking at the moon every second. But after the lunar eclipse, people reported that there was one of these collisions that happened on the moon. And so I went back through the video, found the exact moment, and yep, you can see the little flash during the lunar eclipse, which is the perfect time, right? Because the moon is being darkened by the shadow of the Earth. And so you actually see this flash on the moon. So the moon is in the same cosmic shooting gallery that the Earth is, whether it's from asteroids all the way down to, small particles, meteoroids. Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live question and answers show. I am your host, Fraser Cain, the publisher of Universe Today. I will be your guide to all things space and or astronomy, or whatever you guys want to get into today. So go ahead, put any questions that you might have into the YouTube comments, in the YouTube chat, the live chat, and they get sucked into a database, and then I will be able to answer your questions. Right now, I only have 2, which is weird. Oh, I see the problem. Oh, I see the problem. I gotta fix something. I gotta reauthorize my YouTube. Okay. Now we should be good. Yep, we're back. Okay. Right. So go ahead, put a question, and I will put it into this database where I will then be able to answer it. Now, from some ground rules, I try to give emphasis to the people who've never had a question answered before, and so I can see how many times each one of you have had your questions answered in the show before. So just, I'm not trying to say that people you shouldn't ask your questions. You definitely should, but I really want people who aren't feeling they've ever had a question, want to give it a try. Please ask your question. The second thing is just to remember that I am a journalist, not a scientist. And so if you're going to ask my opinion about things, that is a Sean Carroll kind of thing, right? Someone who actually has a PhD in astrophysics. I can just give you the scientific consensus, which really, that's all we want. And then finally, we get a lot of questions, and we do a lot of these question shows. This is going to go into question show number 412. So we get a lot of the same questions over and over and over again. And so that way, if, it feels like it's the same question I've had many times, I might skip it. Or maybe I just don't know the answer. Or maybe it's going to require a lot of math. Although sometimes I have been doing some math here on the show, so who knows. All right. Let's get into it. Ed Skeptic, I've had millions of questions answered. You've had 8, Ed, from the new system. All right. Kirk Wagner, have you ever thought you were seeing a flying saucer UFO and then recognized the normal thing that you were seeing? So I actually covered this a couple of weeks ago. No, I've never seen a flying saucer or a UFO and then realized what it was. I've only either seen a thing and I knew exactly what it was. It was a bird. It was an airplane. It was Superman. It was Venus. It was a meteor shower. It was a trail of starlinks raising their altitude. I knew what it was, an iridium flash. I knew what it was. But a couple of weeks ago, I saw 2 objects in formation moving together, like satellites. They were clearly moving like satellites, but I didn't recognize 2 satellites moving in formation like that. And it could have just been a fluke that there happened to be 2 satellites that had lined up in this way, and as they were moving across the sky, they were just moving together. Or it might be that there was some kind of docking procedure. Maybe it was the Chinese space station and some other spaceship that was docking with it, but I didn't recognize it. It was unidentified, and it was flying, and it was an object. Or really, it was 2 objects. And so, that's the kind of thing where a person who has seen how the whole UFO phenomenon goes, you see a thing you don't understand, and your proper response is to say, I don't know what that is. It is unidentified. And then you say, if I had more resources, I would try to figure it out, or I'll let somebody else figure that out. But I don't have enough information to know what it is that I'm looking at. Now, if I recorded it very carefully with a camera, if I went and double checked on the movements of various satellites, you can go to heavens above and you can see the motions of the various satellites, then you would get a sense of exactly which satellite it is that you're looking at. But in that case, I, couldn't be bothered. And so I was like, that's 2 satellites. I wonder what they are. And then I came inside. But the problem, of course, is that people will then ascribe knowledge. They will say, it is unidentified, but I am going to identify it as an alien spaceship. because you don't have enough information. You shouldn't do that. So, no, I've only either seen identified things or unidentified things, but never an unidentified thing that I was able to identify. That'd be cool. Billions and billions of stars. Can we expect a meteor storm in our lifetime? Yeah, I think so. The last great meteor storm was, I think, back in the 1960s. So we are, say, 70 years since there was a big meteor storm. And a meteor storm, like a normal meteor shower, think about, say, the Perseids. You get about 60 meteors per hour. The Geminids are pretty much the best meteor shower. You can get over 100, 120 meteors an hour in a really good year. But as I mentioned in another question, the reason we get these meteor showers is because the Earth is going through the trail of debris left from an asteroid or a comet that is orbiting around in the solar system. And so every time the comet comes around, it leaves this trail of particles, and then the trail of particles is pushed by the solar wind and slowly drifts. And astronomers know where each one of the pathways that the comet or the asteroid took when it made its flight. And so you can imagine there are these, I think of them like tubes, right? That there are these tubes which are all of the particles left over from the comet. And then the Earth is passing and can pass above them, below them. And every now and then the Earth passes right through one of these things. And if they're very fresh, if it was a comet that was giving off a lot of material and we happen to pass through it shortly after it's given off all of that material, then you can get a meteor storm. And instead of you getting 100 an hour, you can get thousands of an hour, tens of thousands in an hour, 100,000 meteors in an hour. And you see these paintings or time-lapse photos that were taken during past meteor storms. And it is just like the sky is falling. It looks like some kind of science fiction thing where you've just got meteors just raining down in the sky. Like this would be, people always ask me, like, what's the thing that you would like to see in space? And I want to see a really nice, close, big comet. And I want to see a meteor storm. That would be absolutely incredible. But yeah, let's say they happen once a century. We could have one, but you never know. You might not have one for several centuries. So it's got to happen at some point. Dougal, was the feedback on your movie list as expected? So I posted my top 100 movies and my top 100 TV shows by request. So people in the QAs have been asking me to post my lists, and so I did. And what was funny was I got a lot of people who were quite angry with the ordering of my choices, that they couldn't believe that Interstellar was all the way down at number 44 when they thought it was number 1, while 12 Monkeys was number 1. Well, it was alphabetical. I just made the list alphabetical. So I didn't feel like getting into the minutia of the position of every single object on that list. I wanted it to be, if you want to know what are the best movies and television shows that Fraser has ever watched that are kind of spacey, these are them. And chances are you've seen many of them, but it might be some on that list that you've never seen. So go ahead and grab them. So that was, I was sort of having to patiently explain to people that the list was alphabetical. And then they after said something very mean to me, took it back, which was great to hear. Because normally you don't get that. Normally you just get people saying mean things to you. And then there were some notable exceptions, and there's a couple of things that I definitely have under consideration, but I think people feel like I just sort of, quickly wrote this out. And I haven't. No, I have been thinking about this list for about 6 months, carefully adding things, removing things, double checking larger lists, looking through internet movie database. Like this took me a long time and even though it's just like a list of 100, actually it's 104 things, but I feel like I can stand behind every single one of those. And if you ask me to justify why I liked Mars Express, I can give you the answer. So that was great. And it was sort of also cool that I could hold off on the list until Project Hail Mary came out. So Project Hail Mary came out, and I put it on the list because it's definitely one of the best 100 space movies that I've ever seen. I loved it. Is it in my top 10? No, but it's still great. So that was fun. And I think at this point, Anton, my producer, and I were sort of thinking about what we can do sort of moving forward. And Anton kind of likes the idea of it being a bit like Top Gear, where they have the lap times for their track. And so we can have the top list of 100 movies and finalize it at 100 movies. And then when there's a new movie, I can consider, does it make the list? Is it good enough to be on this list? And if it is, then I'll have to remove one off my top 100 list, which will be kind of fun. So hopefully we'll have a sort of a nicer way. And eventually, I'll probably provide you actual reviews of each one of the items on the list to help you understand why I think it's worth your time. But I think just if you trust me, everything I put on that list is worth your time. James, I'm surprised Fraser watched all of them. Granted, he has more time to watch movies compared to me. I'm also just old, right? I'm just old, and so I've watched lots of things. Yeah, if you're looking at it, it's on my community on the post tab where the list of movies are and television shows. Sid Vicious, how do you see how many questions I've asked before? Well, I can't show you, but every person's name. Well, okay, so I have this database that I run all of my comments on, and so every couple of times a day, it downloads all of the comments from YouTube. It also downloads all of the comments that come from all of the live streams, and then I attach your name and your picture, because then when we do the edited question show, we figure out which of the questions that were answered during the live show we're going to go into which of the question shows and which ones are going to go into the overtime segments. And then the editor gets your avatar and your username so that we can actually include that in the show. If you watch, we actually put people's avatars, and we have to maintain the avatar and the username all the way through from when you ask the question to when we post it in our show. And so as part of that, we have a database. And so I have a list of every question you've ever asked. I promise I won't use it against you, Sid. But you've had one question. You've been featured one time before using the new system. So I know, I recognize your name, and so I know you've asked questions many times in the past. But in the new system, you've had one question that has been featured, which is different. So before, we were keeping track of how many times you've asked a question that's ended up in one of the edited question shows that we've released on the channel. And now we don't do that. I just keep an eye. But it's not like I'm very strict about it. I just really want people who've never asked questions before to not feel afraid that your questions are going to be fun. I promise, you're not going to ask me a stupid question if it is a genuine, honest question. Instead, I'm going to either, if the answer to your question is very simple, I'm going to spin it and show you why actually there is more depth to your question than most people might think. So please, if you feel like you've got a question or some piece of space and astronomy that's been bothering you and you just don't feel like you understand it yet, let me help. Phoenix Warp, Fraser, you've never answered a question of mine. I don't know. Actually, I choose to believe Fraser has photographic memory and refuse to believe otherwise. I definitely do not have a photographic memory. My wife thinks that I have a surprisingly good memory. She she is shocked when there is like the theme song to some movie that I've only heard once, and I can hum the tune, and it's from 20 years ago. And she's like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. Is that not normal?" And she's, "That is not normal. That is unusual." So I sometimes pieces of information stick in my brain, and they hold fast, and so I'm able to access them. But I mentioned this in the past, that I kind of cheat, which is that I use this program called Anki, which is a flashcard system, to internalize facts in my brain that I think are important, like the escape velocity of Mars, or the amount of protons per cubic meter, because I think it's useful to provide additional concrete information when you are answering questions, that instead of being kind of hand wavy about it, if you can be specific, that is better. That the Earth travels around the sun at 30 kilometers per second. And so a lot of information I just have memorized on purpose. And then I find that extremely useful when I am doing, say, Space Bites, because I'm explaining some piece of science, and I'm explaining whatever's the new piece of news, but I have all of the other information in my brain. And so, like, I think a lot of people think that it's not useful to remember information anymore. That why bother? Why bother remembering stuff when you can just look it up on, you can Google it, or you can have AI explain it to you. But I think offloading your cognitive work out of your brain is worse for you in the long run if you need to use this information on a regular basis. I really like having this stuff in RAM, right? As opposed to me having to look it up every time I need to find out some piece of information. And so when I find a new piece of information, I put it into my Anki, I memorize it, it goes into my RAM, and now I have access to it. So, sorry to explain it, but I, because I want to be able to do this kind of stuff live. I want to be able to answer these questions, and I don't even know what the questions are. I find this really fun, but I want to be able to do a good job. And so I spend time every day memorizing space facts just so I have access to this information when I need it, which is kind of weird. Brewster, what's the exact speed of light? Quick, 299,000 kilometers per second. I forget the rest. Is it 953? 299,953. I forget the exact. Okay, now I've got to see what I got. I haven't memorized that. 299,792. There you go. Phoenix Warp 1. When our sun goes red giant, we on Earth are toast, but would that exercising heat put Jupiter or Saturn into a more habitable zone? Yes, when the sun becomes a red giant, which it will do in about 5 billion years from now, it will expand outward. It will gobble up Mercury. It'll gobble up Venus. It may or may not gobble up Earth, but it doesn't matter. Earth will be toast. It will be burnt to a cinder. It will not be a place worth living on. But the habitable zone will expand out to 7 to 16 astronomical units, which incorporates Jupiter. And so Jupiter's moons will melt, and they will be in the habitable zone. And so you will be able to go out to Jupiter's moons and just swim in them like an ocean. Although you will also still be under the intense radiation from Jupiter. It'll be a very bad day. But still, yeah. Karen, does the avatar update when we ask new questions? Yes. So it actually updated behind the scenes. So now I can see that I've featured your question once. Cynic extraordinaire. If we disregard the geopolitical reasons, it probably won't ever happen. Is the project idea, is the cynic extraordinaire. If we disregard the geopolitical reasons why it probably wouldn't ever happen, is the Project Orion idea of using nuclear explosions as propulsion a viable concept for achieving interstellar travel? So there's kind of two answers to this. Like, obviously, as you said, you know, the geopolitical side of things, the realistic prospects of detonating nuclear weapons in the atmosphere of the Earth to accelerate a spacecraft is probably not that likely to get approval, because, you know, this is where we live. But if you were out in space and you were detonating nuclear weapons, then you would be able to impart a kick to a spacecraft. And the Project Orion is the result of a very famous paper where someone did the math and calculated what would happen. And the gist is that you are dropping nuclear bombs out the back of a spaceship, and you are timing it perfectly so that the thing explodes and is sort of, the force is absorbed by a pusher plate on the back of the spacecraft. And then the spacecraft receives a push in the opposite direction and also ablates. And you get this thrust coming from the nuclear explosions as they are going off behind the spacecraft. And if you watched the Three Body Problem TV series and read the book, watched whatever, in the Netflix even, they cover this idea, sort of a mini version of this, where they have little nuclear bombs go off and they're trying to send a spacecraft out at relativistic velocities, and the spacecraft has to follow this trajectory of bombs that are going off to accelerate it. But I have seen plenty of takedowns on Project Orion that the idea, you know, obviously there's like a lot of moving parts. You have to store a whole bunch of nuclear weapons. You have to keep them working to be able to use this as a method of transportation, and that you kind of really want something that gives you more finesse. And so that's why people are focusing on laser sails or antimatter as more realistic, or astrophage as a more realistic way to travel between star systems. Jimmy James, how many decimals of pi do you know? It's like I don't memorize pi. 3.141592653? I forget. The X-Board. Do quasars have a habitable zone? That is a really interesting question. So everything has a habitable zone, right? Anything that is giving off radiation is going to be giving off radiation so that things in their vicinity are receiving that radiation. They're receiving it as you know, and things that are very close, the temperature they're going to be experiencing is very high, and things that are very far, it's going to be very cold. And there's going to be this sweet spot where things are where liquid water could be on the surface of a world and be melted, right? But when you think about a quasar, you know, we experience a quasar as this quasi-stellar object. It is this very bright star-like object that is seen at high redshifts, very, very far distances. And that is because we're looking at a jet that is coming off of this actively feeding supermassive black hole. Black hole has accumulated a bunch of material. The material is swirling around the black hole. The magnetic fields around the black hole have collimated these jets of material that are coming out the poles of the black hole. And if we are looking sort of, if we're looking right down the throat of this, that's called a blazar. And if we're looking like a little off to the side, that's what a quasar is. And then if we're looking at it edge on, that's called a Seyfert galaxy, because we're not seeing the central black hole region, we're seeing the dust that's around it. So you only experience those in radio waves. But the accretion disk around the black hole is kind of like the interior of a star, because this material is piled up. It's very hot, high pressure. You've actually got nucleosynthesis that is happening inside the accretion disk. And so it's like a star. And so it's giving off enormous amounts of radiation. And so at a certain distance from that accretion disk, you're going to have the amount of radiation be comfortable. and you would be able to have a planet, as long as it had like a nice geomagnetic field to stop the radiation coming from the vicinity around the black hole, yeah, you would have liquid water on the surface. Now, it depends on the mass of the black hole. It depends on the amount of material that's in the accretion disk, the temperature of the accretion disk, but absolutely, anything that is giving off temperature, like extreme amounts of temperature, is going to have a habitable zone. There's a habitable zone around white dwarf stars. There's one around neutron stars, and there would definitely be one around actively feeding supermassive black holes. Stormcrow, I work with both university level and high school level students that build competitive robots, and they've asked me about a career path that would lead to working on projects like James Webb or the Extremely Large Telescope. Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like your students are on the right track working on robotics. When you think about a modern space mission like James Webb or the Extremely Large Telescope or the Habitable Worlds Observatory or the Large Interferometer for Exoplanets, these missions are made up of a bunch of pieces. So you have the flight side of things. So the hardware that actually puts this telescope out into space. So that's an aerospace engineer. People who are designing the rockets, working on the upper stage, working on the aeroshell, working on all the parts that can get these things out into space. And then you have aerospace engineers working on thrusters, things that are going to allow the spacecraft to maintain its position in space. Then you have avionics. You have people that are working on in electronics. You have communication systems that are sending information to and from the spacecraft. You have hardware, people working on actuators, on instrumentation. You have people who are working on the optics systems that they specialize in telescope mirrors and being able to get like a perfect image on that. There was a great interview that I just did with the architect Lee Feinberg for the Habitable Worlds Observatory, and he talks about a lot of the kinds of things that he's working on. So, and then of course there's software people. You need software engineers to tie all this together, to be able to write the code that makes the spacecraft do the things that it's supposed to do. And so any STEM trajectory that your students are going to want to go on, like they're going to want to go to university, and they're either going to want to go into software engineering and specialize in aerospace or mechanical engineering, or they're going to want to get their physics and their astronomy to be able to sort of understand the underlying math and physics with this. And then they're going to want to target things like the European Space Agency or NASA or various aerospace firms to be able to get their early careers. And then at the same time, like this kind of experience working on robots is fantastic, right? Just like this practical experience. And this is the incredible revolution that we live in today. You can go onto YouTube and you can see people making incredible things in robotics. You can go and buy an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. You can buy actuators. You can buy all of the parts that you require. You can have AI help you understand and how to kind of put it all together, or at least what are the various bits and pieces to help you write the code so that you can make practical things happen in robotics. And the more of that experience you have in your personal time, in addition to you getting the right amount of school, those careers are there, and there's plenty of work out there if you're willing to go for it. Yeah, that sounds great. Phobos Scorpio. If Jupiter could be turned into a red dwarf, could it be used to theoretically power a ring-world starship to explore the galaxy beyond, with it as the solar generator? Whoa, that is some mega engineering that you are proposing here. So let's break this down bit by bit. So the first thing is, could you turn Jupiter into a red dwarf star? So Jupiter is 1/80th the mass that you would require to make a red dwarf star. So the minimum red dwarf star has 7.5% the mass of the sun. Any lower than that, and you just don't have enough mass for you to ignite fusion at the core of your star. So once you hit that minimum 7.5%, now you have a red dwarf star. And Jupiter is 1/80th, or like 1/77th the mass of the smallest possible red dwarf star. So the first thing you would need to do, if you really want to have that red dwarf star, is you need to find another 76, 77 Jupiters, right? Find those, crash them into Jupiter, and then you will have a star. It'll take a few million years, but it will turn into a star. So that's the first part of the problem. But you sound ambitious. I'm sure you can figure this out. So the second question is, could you then power a starship to explore the galaxy? And so there are absolutely ideas that have been thought about for this. And so the term is called a Shkadov thruster, or a stellar engine. And what you would do is that you would set up some kind of mirror, some kind of reflecting shape that would be sitting off to the side of the star. And then the star would be pumping out tons of radiation. That material would bounce off of this mirror that you've set up and impart momentum. It would start to push this mirror away. But the mirror would be pulling at the star with its gravity. And so it would be pulling the star with it. And so then you could just kind of move the mirror around in different directions and the star would follow behind it. And that sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it doesn't violate the laws of physics. And you don't have to make a very big device for you to start to get a thrust if you want. I think there was a paper where they were calculating this, that you could move a spacecraft, you could move a star system tens of thousands of light years in a couple of million years with one of these Shkadov thrusters. And so I think, you don't need to turn Jupiter into a red dwarf. You can just build one of these thrusters for the sun. Like, why not just take the solar system with us? And we can just start moving the solar system to other places in the galaxy. And this is one of the arguments for why we don't see any evidence of advanced civilizations out there in the universe, which is that maybe if a civilization has been around for billions of years, then maybe they will have started to build Shkadov thrusters around their stars in their entire galaxy and start to reorganize the galaxy into a form that is more useful to them. That the current structure of the Milky Way is actually very random and disorganized and inefficient. And instead, you could take like this central supermassive black hole, surround that by a ring of other black holes, and then you could have those black holes have rings of stars that are around them, and then those stars could have rings of planets that are around them, and then those planets could have rings of, so you could reorganize an entire galaxy into a structure that is stable and could then last for a very long period of time, because galaxies are tearing themselves apart. That over deep time, the galaxy is going to shed its stars one by one as they have these three-body interactions with each other. We already have stars that are on escape trajectories leaving the Milky Way. Eventually, the Milky Way will eject every single one of its stars out into deep space. And all that will be left is the supermassive black hole at the heart of it. Or I guess that's all. It will be all alone. It'll be lonely. So there you go. That's your plan. You've got a to-do list. Get to work. Sorry, just looking at the questions. Frosty Winnipeg. Fraser, are you shocked that For All Mankind is getting a season 6? Ed Baldwin is going to be 90. So, I mean, this is just an opportunity for me to talk about For All Mankind, which I absolutely love. And it's in my top 10 of television shows. What a great show. If you aren't familiar with it, For All Mankind is on Apple TV. And the gist is that what if the Soviets beat the Americans to the moon? And by doing so, kicked off a space race, a permanent space race that humanity then continued to invest in for the coming decades, with the Soviets and the Americans and the Koreans and the Chinese racing to build a larger and larger human presence in space. And it just goes through the trials and tribulations, starting with the Apollo era, and then you've got a moon base in the 1970s. You've got Mars exploration in the 1980s, and the show is now almost caught up. I think it's like it's like 2010 in the show at this point, and there's a bustling new city on Mars. And apparently this is the penultimate season. So we're going to see the next season after that. And it is really like a precursor to The Expanse, that they're, if you've watched The Expanse, they're kind of setting up the rivalry between Mars and Earth. You can see that they're going to probably try to secede from Earth control. Who knows when the Beltalotas show up. But it's a great show, and like a perfect companion to The Expanse. So am I shocked that it's getting season 6? No, it sounds great. Yes, they are dragging these actors through season after season, putting them in ever more age makeup for them to be able to play their roles. But still, it's a terrific show. Definitely one of the favorites. Church discography. These live streams used to draw over 500 viewers. Where did everybody go? Well, one of the things is recently with the new system, we haven't been creating the event in advance with enough notice. And so what I used to do was at the end of each event, I would set up the next event immediately. And then and that way people would remember that it was there and they'd get reminders of it. And this event was only set up yesterday. So what we need to do, Anton, is make the event the next morning, Tuesday morning, so that then it sits there for the entire week and people get a notification and they remember that it's going to be there and they give themselves a reminder and then they show up. DS8197. My favorite animal has always been turtles and tortoises. Do you have a favorite animal? Probably birds. Specifically, I really like swallows. Swallows are really cool. They're like little jet fighters. And we have them where I live. And so we can watch swallows playing around, sometimes dozens of them in the field around our house. I also like hummingbirds, which I know people who live outside of North America, you don't have hummingbirds. And hummingbirds are they're amazing birds that you have. I mean, they're like little helicopters. And they just have this level of, they just fly around and they're angry and they fight each other. Hummingbirds are terrific. So yeah, I would say I like birds the best. Vistotudi, would it be possible to direct a comet into an orbit that hit our moon at fairly low speed? So like, would it be possible? Yes. But you got to provide your definition of fairly low speed, that no matter what you do, it is going to hit the moon at tens of kilometers per second. There is no way you're not getting a nuclear bomb like detonation off of the surface of the moon when your comet strikes it. So, but would it be possible to arrange that kind of a crash into the moon? It would be theoretically possible. You would just, we did the DART mission that NASA was able to change the orbit of an asteroid a tiny little bit. And so you can imagine either doing some version of the DART mission on a comet to put it into a collision course with the moon, or to have, do a series of flybys of the comet with asteroids. You have to change the orbit of an asteroid so it does a close flyby of a comet so that you change its trajectory. But to both have it crash into the moon and have it come in at a reasonable velocity is a big ask. So what you're probably just going to get is this thing crashing into the moon, exploding, vaporizing, and then the debris raining down across the moon. And, one of the possibilities for why we see the permanently shadowed craters at the south pole of the moon that contain water ice is that these are from cometary impacts on the moon. That one of these things crashed into the moon. You got ice, the ice rained down across the entire moon. The stuff that was in the sunlit side, it evaporated, sublimated, but the stuff that landed in those permanently shadowed craters was unaffected by the sun and was able to build up. And now we have billions of years worth of this material showing up. But, if you're hoping to make an atmosphere, that's probably not the best way to go about it. The best way to go about it would be to set up factories on the surface of the moon, solar powered factories where you are taking regolith in, which is, say, silicon oxide, iron oxide, titanium oxide, aluminum oxide, and you are breaking it up into its metal and its waste oxygen, and then you're just releasing that oxygen. And the moon can hold on to an atmosphere. You're going to need to replenish it from time to time, but if you just had great big solar-powered factories that were scooping up regolith, breaking it into rock and gas, you would build up the atmosphere thickness on the moon. And eventually you could get to 1 atmosphere if you wanted to. You just have to build a lot of factories and spend a lot of time. Shangri-La, how bad is the AI affecting astro jobs? I haven't gotten any perspective. I haven't seen anything that artificial intelligence is causing damage to astronomy jobs. I've seen a few papers, and I actually interviewed somebody here on the channel about whether or not the modern large language models have any value in astronomy at all. And the jury is still out about whether or not it actually has value. What they did in their work was they took I think they took ChatGPT and had it look at, or maybe it was Gemini, they had it look at images taken by telescopes and try to identify interesting features in that picture. And they were specifically looking for a certain kind of anomalous galaxy, but they just wanted to see if the ChatGPT would notice anything. And they were able to identify the objects in the picture, and then they were able to do queries, turn that into a database, and they were able to do queries on that database to turn up interesting things that could have follow-on exams. But obviously it's going to be a lot worse than a machine learning algorithm that has just been trained to only look at pictures in astronomy, right? Where you just give it 1 million classified images of galaxies, and then it is able to identify galaxies very well. But it can't write a poem, or it can't do your college essay for you. So right now, I think the jury is out on whether or not AI, specifically the large language models, have any value in astronomy. But a lot of people are finding them very valuable for coding or for assisting with their mathematics, for their advanced mathematics. People are writing using their astronomy knowledge. They're working with something like Claude or ChatGPT to write the code for some simulation. They are double checking the results to see whether or not the thing is producing good work, and then they're able to, understand that. People are using it in, assisting them at understanding other people's papers, filtering material that's out there. So we're really in the kind of the very nascent stages, but I have not heard of any discoveries that have been made thanks to AI, or with AI, or I always have to be really careful when I say this, right? When I talk about AI, I'm talking about large language models, ChatGPT, so on. But machine learning, the old school AI that we've been doing for decades, that is deeply used in the astronomy. That is deeply used in the astronomy community. That many astronomers have come up with really cool machine learning algorithms that have helped them discover craters and comets and asteroids and all kinds of stuff like that. So, it definitely has not taken the astro community by storm, and it definitely hasn't killed jobs in the way other issues have killed jobs in the scientific community right now. So, yeah, we have to wait and see what happens. James Nian, next question would be, what's the max? Oh, James Nian, what's the max atmosphere the moon could hold on to, ignoring solar wind? Would it be comparable to Titan? It just depends on how much gas you want to create at the moon. So the atmospheric pressure that you would experience on the surface of the moon would just come down to how much gas is present and available. The atmospheric pressure on Titan is roughly double what we experience here on Earth. Or it's 1.5? Yeah, so the atmospheric pressure on Titan is greater than what we experience on the Earth. And so even though it is a smaller moon, less gravity, it has more atmosphere, and so it is thicker. And then, of course, you look at Venus, right? Venus, it's like 93 times the atmospheric pressure down on the surface of Venus. So you can have a wide range. So if you were willing to just throw tons and tons and tons of atmosphere onto the moon, eventually you would end up with something that is denser. I'm sure the very limit is once you get out of the, I don't know, the Roche limit, once you get out of the Hill sphere of the moon, once you get out of the Hill sphere of the moon, sort of the point where the Earth's gravity takes over objects orbiting around the moon, that would be your limit. But that is a very big distance away from the surface of the moon. So you could make a very dense, thick atmosphere around the moon if you wanted to. I'm not sure why you would, but you could. Derpy Penguin, if you could interview any science officer from Star Trek, who would you interview and why? Like, I can't even, are there other science officers? There's Spock. Why would you want to interview anybody else? It's Skeptic. Are ring galaxies the result of a black hole explosion or a collision at the center? Yeah, ring galaxies are the result probably of a collision. So there are these galaxies that look like they've had the center punched out of them. And what has probably happened is at some point in the distant past, another galaxy passed directly through the center of the galaxy and sort of caused all of the dust where star formation would happen. What it did was it compressed all of the dust in the target galaxy and itself. And so that would lead to a bunch of star formation. It would essentially starve out all of the gas reserves of the galaxy, make it go through its star formation very quickly. And now when you look at it, billions of years later, it is no longer actively producing stars. And so it looks like there's this hole in the middle of the galaxy. There's another kind of sort of a similar object called a jellyfish galaxy. And this is the same thing where a galaxy has gone through another galaxy and you've got these kind of trailing clouds of dust that are trailing behind it. And they kind of look like jellyfish tentacles underneath the galaxy. there's a question right there. Where is it? Gadzooks. If Venus had a moon, would it be any different? Probably. Venus is very different in the solar system in that it is essentially, it has rolled over upside down. So the axial tilt on Venus is 177 degrees, which is effectively completely upside down. It is turning backwards from the direction that the rest of the planets are turning, and very slowly. And one of the explanations for this is that Venus just never had a large moon, the way the Earth has a large moon. And the moon has probably regulated the axial tilt of the Earth, stopped the Earth from rolling over, because it's like an outrigger, right? When you have a boat and you have another pontoon out the side of your boat, it is keeping your ship from tipping over. And the moon sort of has performed that service for the Earth, and Venus doesn't have that. And so it's possible that Venus rolled over because of a lack of a large moon. But it's also possible that Venus rolled over because it was impacted by a large moon, or because it was impacted by another planetoid. Like when you think about the collision that caused the Earth and the moon system, maybe that happened to Venus as well. And without a large moon to form afterwards, it just rolled over. So there's still a lot of mysteries about Venus right now, and that's one of the reasons why we want to be able to send spacecraft back to Venus to explore it and understand its internal structure. Maybe just it is unbalanced in a way that caused it to roll over like that. Giohondo, is there any sci-fi book better than Hail Mary? Oh, absolutely. Sorry, Andy Weir. You're a great guy, and you're a great writer. But there are definitely, and Andy Weir would agree with this, that there are better books out there. There are amazing science fiction books that are out there. What I think was great about Project Hail Mary and The Martian is that it's just written in this really accessible style. It's funny and it's engaging and it is gripping and it is scientifically accurate. That, I've had a chance to talk to Andy in the past, and the amount of work that he went into, he wrote software programs that simulated the various parts of the missions that he was doing. He calculated how much astrophage it would take to be able to make Project Hail Mary work out. He's calculated the velocities that were required for the various spacecraft in The Martian, the pressure of the various habitats. Like, he didn't, at every point when science was needed, he learned the science, did the math, so that it could then inform the story. And in some cases, you ended up with something that was very cool, something unexpected, something that was surprising, something that caused conflict. So it's a terrific set of books. I haven't read the third one. I haven't read Artemis. People have said it's like not as good as The Martian or Project Hail Mary, but apparently they're turning this into a movie too now. I don't know if you've heard, he got into a bit of a spat with the folks from Star Trek because he'd said that he had pitched a Star Trek series and they had turned him down. And he was like, well, screw them. And I guess that ruffled feathers, and he apologized, and like, this is it. Come on, Star Trek. Have Andy Weir be the showrunner for a new Star Trek series. Please. I beg you. That would be awesome. But are there science fiction stories? So, like Dune is a better science fiction story than Project Hail Mary or The Martian, in my opinion. The Martian is about a scientist who is overcoming this incredible challenge, meeting an alien and working together. And it's about teamwork, and it's about, the stakes are big, and the pacing of the story is great. Dune is about rooting for the hero who is going to become the villain, and the complex world building that goes into Dune is just next level. And then you have that paired up with the incredible filmmaking of Denis Villeneuve with Dune and the sequel, and then the upcoming part 3. He's probably one of the greatest modern filmmakers right now, working on what is possibly one of the best science fiction stories ever written. It is, how do you beat that, right? I watched Dune again just a month ago with my wife, and we're both just, it's so good. So yeah, I think, and I am, there are other science, and then I think like people will have lots of other science fiction books that they would love to see made. I would love to see a Bobiverse series, right? We're Legion, I Am Bob is the first book, and it's terrific. And if you enjoyed The Martian, or if you enjoyed Project Hail Mary, it's the same kind of style, a smart alecky computer nerd who is turned into a spaceship. And it's terrific. And then if you want sort of something else in that vein, check out Dungeon Crawler Carl. There are 8 books now, and they are all wonderful. But are they as good as Dune? No. They are great though. So I think, you could have a story that you just really enjoy, and you are entertained throughout the entire duration of the story. And you walk out the other side and you go like, that was a great movie. That was a great book. Man, that was so much fun. I feel happy and light. And then you can walk out of a movie or a book and you're like, whew, that was an ordeal, but I was entertained. I was challenged. I had some deep questions. I kind of look at the world a little differently now when I think about what does it mean to want power or wealth, or to need to stand up for the obligations of my family, or what events have been put into motion that have been controlling me throughout my entire time that I've just been sleepwalking through. Like you walk out with reflections, right? That is a good book. Good book. The best books have got to hit you at every one of those levels. They've got to be entertaining in the moment. I consider 1984 to be the same kind of thing, where you read 1984 and you're like, that was a great book. Every moment that I was reading that book, I was entertained. I was horrified. I was made uncomfortable, but it was really good. But also, it made me take a good long look at society and the way I live my life, and the way people are talking, and the way people are polarized, and the kinds of concepts. I can see the slippery slope that we are moving towards, or the Handmaid's Tale, or so. There are amazing science fiction books, probably ones that are unfilmable, that would be incredible. Maybe Denis Villeneuve will be able to get his hands on them and do a good job of them. That's funny. Church Discography is saying that God Emperor of Dune was my favorite. Like we've got like Children of Dune. So if you've read the books, I don't want to spoil it, but you can see where this is going, right? With the second part of Dune, Paul is saying, I can't do what the Bene Gesserit want me to do. They're leading me by the nose. They have invented this prophecy, and now they have made me genetically the result, and I am here to fulfill that prophecy, and I'm not going to do it. But then, out of desperation, he has to. And in the end, he begins a war with the galaxy, and it's only going to end in sorrow. It's only going to end in sadness. And that's just like, it's the great way to kind of pull things together. You can actually watch Children of Dune. They did the Sci-Fi Channel did a take on Dune back in the 1990s, early 2000s, and it's pretty good if you can get your hands on it. They did the Dune, they did the Children of Dune, Prophet, like this. They got like into the third book, and then it all starts to get pretty weird. But God Emperor of Dune is bananas, like crazy town. And so if you can make it all the way into God Emperor of Dune, you are made of very stern stuff. The book series that I would love to see made, I would love to see Revelation Space made into a book series. I'm reading the Children of Time series. I'd love to see that made as a movie. That would be incredible. But man can dream. Simpsons.com. Why I missed the old intro where we get a little update into your life, like what's for dinner, new in the garden, travel plans, telescope build. Is that missing? Is that a thing that I used to do? I feel like I put that stuff at the end now. So like what happened, the way these question shows work is I do the live stream, I answer all of your questions in rapid fire, and then Chad and Anton will go through and chop it up and decide what's going to go into the various shows for the week. And then I will record the show, and then I will do an outro. And, part of the issue with YouTube, of course, is that the attention is short, and that if you don't come right out of the gates as quickly as you can, then attention will fall off and people will leave your video, and then YouTube takes that as a bad sign, and then they stop showing your videos. And so I've sort of backloaded all of that stuff. But I generally, I'm always like trying to think of things to talk about at the end of the question shows when I'm recording them. So that's why I'm talking about shows I'm watching or things we're doing in the garden or telescope things that I'm looking forward to or all that. But yeah, no, that's, there's no, it's someone saying in the comments, there's no specific overtime section anymore. It's all just mashed together. So I do stuff that's specific about space and astronomy, or I answer questions about life. Stanton 415. What's the weirdest thing about you? I think I talked about this earlier on in the show, and this is the thing that my wife noticed, is just this weird accumulation of facts that I have no control over, that I can hear something once and 20 years later recite it word by word, and then other stuff I don't remember where I put the keys. So yeah. But I think, okay, and I'll give you the other thing that's kind of weird about me is, I think I am very easygoing, weirdly easygoing. And that's a thing that I think, I don't know if that comes through in the recordings, in the shows that I do, or in the conversations that I have when I'm doing interviews or any of that kind of thing. But I'm kind of unflappable. I used to travel when my wife was living in Texas or Louisiana. It would take me almost 24 hours to get from Vancouver Island all the way down to Louisiana. And I would show up and be chipper and happy and ready to go. Right. Well, most people would have just been destroyed by 24 hours of travel, sleeping in airports, schlepping from plane to plane. I'm just kind of easygoing about the whole process, and am just calm about it. And so, if you knew me in real life, I think you would find that weird, that I am just kind of, very, very, not resilient. Maybe resilient is the right word, but just unflappable. And it was very useful back when I was in my sort of business days, working on projects, leading projects, where people would be freaking out because we were on deadline, or the client wasn't bringing things, and we were having to rush and hurry. And I would just be like, yeah, this will all be fine. Everything's gonna be fine. I feel like I don't know if you've seen Apocalypse Now, where he's standing outside on the trying to get the soldiers to surf, and he's just standing there and bombs are going off around him. He's not even flinching. Yeah. In business like that would be me. In real life, no, I would totally be flinching, but yeah, I sort of am very hard to freak out about that kind of thing. Jimmy Davis is saying that's an Islander trait. Yeah, okay, so Canadian style. So I think so it could very well be that is literally just a cultural thing because many of my friends are similar in that way as well. And the joke that I have for my wife is I say West Coast. She's like, "Oh, we've been invited to a party. What are we gonna wear?" And I just say West Coast. Like that is not a question that we even consider. What you're gonna wear is what you're wearing, right? Like you were going to hop on your mountain bike and you're going to ride over to your friend's place and you're going to show up to their party. And you're not going to worry one iota about whether you're underdressed or overdressed. You are at their party. And what do you bring? You bring beer, or you bring shrimp. You bring a fish, right? And so it's taken her about 10 years living in Canada to kind of relax to this West Coast style. And it drives her crazy that, in the beginning, it totally drove her crazy, right? Like, when are these people, like, we've got an appointment, when are these people going to come by? I'm like, I don't know, they'll come when they come. They'll be here when they're here. Yeah, but I need a time. Like, we'll hang out, watch TV, work in the garden, they'll show up, and then we'll get to work. But what if they're late? Then they will be late. I don't care, right? Like, yeah, if they don't show up, then I'm not going to pay them. But apart from that, so I think West Coast Canadians, and maybe it's a trait all the way up and down the whole West Coast of North America. Like I think people in Oregon and California and Washington, we're all very similar in this way. But I think for a person who comes with very hard charging, like a person from New York or a person from London, they will break upon the shores of our relaxed attitude about things. It's funny how yeah. So it could just be that like literally is just my culture. And I never, obviously we're all enmeshed in our own culture, so we don't even think about it, right? It's only when we see our culture as examined from some outside group. And I'm sure it drives Anton crazy too, is he's trying to interact with me as a creator. He's trying to produce me, right? And I am just like super chill and super relaxed. And there's, something needs to be done. Urgency. So yeah. There you go. Stanton, California, baby. And then Brewster's, Oregon here. Yeah. We're all very similar, I think. I think there is definitely a West Coast style from British Columbia down to California. I don't know. Is it the same in Western Mexico? That'd be cool. People in the Baja. Paige Potter, not a space question, but do you have any pets? We don't have any pets anymore. So when my wife moved here, she brought 2 dogs, but they have since passed. And then we got another dog. My wife really likes English Bull Terriers. And so we got another English Bull Terrier, and she passed away about 2 years ago. And then previous to that, I had a cat. So I had a, what's it called? It's a kind of gray cat, but it's like a fancy gray cat. Anyway, the best cat in the world. I had the best cat, the greatest cat. And unfortunately, she got hit by a car. So I've had pets most of my life. We don't have pets now, and I don't think we will, just because, it's like having a baby, right? You've got another creature to invest all of your love and attention into, which is amazing and gives you back tenfold. But at the same time, if you want to travel, you have to foist the animal off on somebody else, and then they die. And that really sucks. And it's really hard to sort of open up your heart to have this creature in your life that has a much shorter lifespan than you. So what we have is way too many birds in our garden. It's possible we throw a lot of seed out in the garden. And so our garden is filled with ludicrous amounts of birds, and squirrels and pine martens and raccoons at night, and sometimes a bear. Paige Potter, what's a recent discovery that didn't get much media attention but should have? Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm kind of in a media bubble here because I am seeing the news first, right? Like I am reviewing all the journals, all of the publications that are coming out. And so I'm seeing all the news, the announcements of new telescopes, and then I am deciding whether or not I'm getting excited about these things. I interview the people from the NIAC Awards. I learn about the, LUVAR, right? The LUVAR telescope. I've been talking about that for 10 years now? And so I get so excited about certain kinds of missions that I just I can't believe people aren't amazed by this. Like Vera Rubin. Like I've been, talking about how exciting Vera Rubin is. I'm talking about Gaia mission, things like that. So a lot of it, these missions, I think are really, really important. The communication system on board the Psyche mission, right? It has this laser system where they're able to communicate back home to Earth at broadband speeds. That is a breakthrough in being able to communicate with spacecraft, and at a time when the Deep Space Network, which is how NASA communicates with spacecraft, is completely overloaded. And they only have a limited amount of bandwidth to be able to make radio connections with all these different spacecraft. And NASA has known this is a problem and has launched a spacecraft and has demonstrated they can send a enormous cat video from tens of millions of kilometers away. That's amazing. And this could single-handedly fix the oversubscription bandwidth problem for the upcoming missions. That you can imagine one of these laser systems is going to be installed in every single mission from here on out, and suddenly we're going to be able to receive cat videos from every spacecraft across the solar system. And who wouldn't want that? So I would say that is probably the biggest story that I consider to be underreported, is that this gigantic challenge is in the process of being solved in a way that will make future communication, sending data home, totally different than what it was in the past. Don Campbell, is it too late to interview Jerry Hansen before he flies around the moon? Yeah, I'm sure he's very busy right now, but I'll get him, right? He's Canadian. I'll use my connections at the Canadian Space Agency. I'll wait till he's back to Earth, his schedule has cleared up, and then I will interview him. And then I get to find out what it was like, not what do you think it's going to be like. Matthew, hypothetically, if there was life around Proxima Centauri and we had a powerful enough telescope to see them walking around, would we see them as they were 4 years ago or in real time? 4 years ago. Yeah, so that's what, the speed of light. That's what light years means. Proxima Centauri is over 4 light years away from us. And so it takes light on the surface of Proxima Centauri 4 years to get to us. And so we are seeing events. But it's not just light. Like if they were broadcasting radios from their radio stations, if they had air traffic control systems, if they were shining a powerful laser at us, it would take 4 years. If Proxima Centauri was emitting gravitational waves, it would take 4 years for those gravitational waves to get to us, or 4.3 years. Anyway, yeah. Everything we see out in the universe is in the past. And that's why James Webb was built. It is looking at galaxies as they appeared just a couple 100 million years after the Big Bang. It's not seeing those galaxies as they look today. If it could see them, they would look like spiral galaxies like the Milky Way. but it is seeing them as they were being constructed early on in the universe at the very limits of what it can see. You're seeing the moon as it looked like 1.8 seconds ago. 1.3 seconds ago. Oh, which is it? Chat off to edit it. You're seeing the moon as it looked 1.3 seconds ago. You're seeing the sun as it looked 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago. Shot a ghost. Do you think Europa or Titan has life on it? Do you think the spots found on Mars was past life? So we have no idea if there is life on Europa or Titan or ever on Mars. The trail of astrobiology really comes from the discovery that wherever we find liquid water on Earth, we find life everywhere. Like at the bottoms of glaciers, several kilometers under the surface of the Earth in pockets of water, in nuclear reactors, high up in the atmosphere, in briny conditions, in incredibly hot hydrothermal pools. If the water is liquid, we find life. And so then the question doesn't become, are there places that are kind of like the surface of the Earth, deserts, forests, whatever, on Venus or Mars or Jupiter or whatever. It's that, is there liquid water in one of those worlds? And on Mars, the question is maybe. There are conditions that could be liquid water on Mars, but on Europa, the answer is almost certainly there is a large ocean of liquid water underneath the ice. And then the same thing is probably on Titan, although, some people think maybe Titan, the interior Titan, isn't an ocean of liquid water, that maybe it's slush. But even slush can have life in it. But then we also suspect that there are these oceans of water on many other worlds. All of the large moons around Jupiter, except for Io, so Ganymede, Callisto, and Europa, Enceladus at Saturn, but even Triton going around Neptune, some of the big moons of Uranus, Pluto could have oceans of liquid water underneath the surface. And so then, if we know that there is water in those places, and if there's always life on Earth, then those make sense as the places for us to search. And so far, we have not adequately searched them. So we just don't know the answer to that question. The most accessible place that we could probably get to is either Mars, if we drill down in some place where we suspect there's liquid water under the surface, or Enceladus. Enceladus is that moon of Saturn, which is spewing water ice out into space. And we know that there are, we can detect hydrogen gas mixed in with that water vapor, or the frozen water vapor. We can detect various organic chemicals mixed in with that. So all the kind of raw material for life and the food for life and the water is there, but is there actually life? We still don't know. And this is the big mystery right now that astrobiology is facing. Because if we do find life on one of those worlds, if we find life at Enceladus, if we find life under the surface on Mars, then the next big question is, are we related? So was there some precursor organism that maybe lived on Mars and was somehow made its way over to Earth, or vice versa? Would all the life in the solar system be related? That would be a question. And we could probably, if it does have DNA, we could probably find a common ancestor. Maybe some number of billions of years ago, something split off. Some of it went to Mars and some of it went to Earth. Paige Potter, friendly neighbor question from Canada. Does it look like the U.S. is unified right now, or is it visible that a lot of us are, let's say, energetically disagreeing and trying to push back? People always give me a hard time when I provide some kind of perspective about the United States. So I will provide the Canadian perspective. And of course, I don't speak for all Canadians, but, I talk to a lot of Americans, I do these patron interviews, and often people are, apologetic. Sorry about what's happening, the tariffs and the trying to remove your sovereignty. And I think and this is, I don't want to speak for the entire world, although, this, I think people have been talking about this. I think what's happening in the United States is something that was always there. And we all loved the United States enough to kind of turn a blind eye to it. Right. And I think now it's sort of just been revealed. And so I think it's going to be deeper than, if there's a new Congress, if there's a new Senate, if there's a new president. I hope there's a new president. I mean, like, we would violate the Constitution if there wasn't. But anyway, that there's kind of like a deeper cultural reckoning that may have to happen in the country. So I think that the perspective of a lot of Canadians is, we definitely see the pushback, but it was a real squeaker. Half of the country kind of wanted this. And so I think that's the deeper part that you guys are going to have to sort out. But I'd be interested to see what what other people feel is just, I think for people in the US who are going through this right now, and it's very difficult, you are just shocked and horrified that this is what's happening to you right now. And I think the perspective from other people around the world is, I'm shocked. Well, not that shocked that this is sort of, this is also in your personality, in your country's personality. And this is something that you're going to have to work through. And it's going to take a long time to restore the trust. Like, it won't just happen. Like I've seen estimates that it's going to take 20 years, right? That's, 20 years of dedicated bridge building is what it may take to kind of bring the US back to the position that it was as the world leader, as the beacon on a hill, the place of the rules-based order that we all admire from afar and try to emulate. So it's going to be tough. And I'm sorry you're going through this. Melantoria. What do you think about the Canadian rocket companies like Reaction Dynamics that got contracts from the Canadian Space Agency to develop domestic launch capacity? Yeah, this is really cool. So there is a launch facility being built in Nova Scotia, and a bunch of Canadian companies have gotten contracts to work on that. In fact, one of them is one of the sponsors that I say every single week here. So if you look, I say Nordspace. And Nordspace is one of our Masters of the Universe patrons, and they are also one of the countries that was one. They're also one of the companies that was awarded a contract for helping to build rockets that are going to be launched from this Canadian launch facility. And so that's great. Like, I think, this is one of those things that we should have the ability to launch rockets. We have aerospace engineers. We have an incredible aerospace engineering program here in Canada with many universities. And in the past, the thing you wanted to do is you wanted to get a job in the United States. You wanted to go, or Europe, but you wanted to go to the States. You want to go work at NASA. You want to go work at SpaceX. People don't want that anymore. Right. And so now there is a sort of pent up demand. Like, let's give these people a home here in Canada. Let's make an incredible world-class rocket facility. Let's launch polar orbit rockets, or maybe eventually our rocket sort of ecosystem will get so good that we will be able to participate in other rocket launches, work with the European Space Agency, and work with NASA to help make their rockets better. So, I think this is all moving in the right direction. These are the kinds of technologies that we should invest, because, for me growing up working in technology, the dream was that you would go down to Silicon Valley, you go work in, start up a company in the United States. And that is not the dream anymore. But we've got all these people with all these technological skills that need to find homes and jobs and be able to do this work locally. Otherwise, they're going to go to Europe or they're going to go to China, right? DS8197, is there a private company that will put a temporary International Space Station module to start with to replace the current one to be deorbited? So the current plan, we actually got an update from NASA last week about what their current plans are for the International Space Station. And so originally the plan was they were going to just deorbit the International Space Station in 2030. And so they're going to get a sort of fancy version of Crew Dragon that's going to, or Cargo Dragon, that's going to push the International Space Station out of orbit into the graveyard of the Pacific. But, the problem is that leaves NASA without a place to send astronauts into space. They were building the Lunar Gateway, which would be this halfway point, gravitationally speaking, to the moon. But now it looks like that's going to be put on pause. So the new plan is that NASA is going to work with commercial operators to put a commercial module onto the International Space Station. And then private space station companies will add modules to that. So you've got VAST, and there's other, I think Axiom Space is potentially building a space station, and I'm sure there's some other ones as well. And so they will add on to this module on the International Space Station. And then when it's time for the International Space Station to be deorbited, they will detach this commercial module from the station. The station will be deorbited, and now you'll have the beginnings of a new privately built space station. And then NASA will just pay for occupancy on this station to whoever is running it. And so then they'll be able to send out their astronauts in Crew Dragons. They'll be able to set up lab equipment, do work, visit the rest of the commercial space station. And so that is the plan. But building hardware for space is very complicated and very expensive. And it's amazing that there are companies that are planning to do this, companies that are really well along in the direction. Like, take a look at what VAST is up to. They are very close to actually being able to launch a space station. But that is assuming that there is a business model, and the business model is going to hold. And so you just never know how this is all going to play out. With a government-run space station, you have this guarantee. So it could be, there's many different possibilities. One possibility is that everything goes great. The private space stations are doing well. There is booming business. There's a need for research on board these space stations. They're able to pay. People are able to pay them for occupancy on these stations, and the stations are able to pay for their launch costs, and the system works, and you have the beginnings of this nascent space-based infrastructure. And that would be that would probably be the perfect outcome if we got that. In the same way that we have private infrastructure for airplanes and airports and things like that, right? Hotels, like you don't have government running these kinds of things. This comes out of demand from the marketplace. So that would be sort of like the dream, is that we are no longer in it takes government to even make this thing work. Now we're in this place where these things just happen, and government is one customer among many. But the other possibility is that we're just not ready, that it's just too expensive, that the business model isn't there, that the customers aren't there, that these things will launch, but they won't be able to have enough funding to be able to continue to launch other modules. And eventually these things will have to be deorbited, and then there will be no space station in space except for the countries that are willing to invest in these things on an ongoing basis. Right now, that's China. And India is planning on building their space station in the next couple of years. And maybe that's the best partnership, right? India is an ally of Europe and the United States. And maybe the Indians will build a space station, and then NASA will build a module, and they'll attach that module to the Indian space station. And then there will be a NASA presence, and maybe even a European presence in space. I think that would be great. That would work very, very well. So, I think there's still so much science that needs to be done to be able to, that I think we don't have the questions answered about long-term habitation in space, what it does to the human body. There are still too many science experiments to be run, even though the International Space Station has been continuously inhabited for almost 30 years now. We don't have all the answers. That there's still tons and tons of work to be done. We're just starting to figure out material science that can be done in space. So I think there is value there for space station. And you've got the NASA contracts, the lunar, the commercial lunar partnership, where you've got all these landers that have been going to the surface of the moon. Most of them have crashed. Blue Ghost was successful, but NASA says that just in 2027 alone, they're going to send 30 landers to the moon. That's a lot of business that the landing companies can use to develop their technology, their infrastructure, and bring on more customers to be able to do that work. So we stand at a crossroads now. It might be that now is the time for us to be able to switch to a sort of commercially sustained private space exploration process, but maybe we're a little too early and the whole thing is going to collapse in on itself. We'll have to find out. Scientists baffled. Why is space so fake and gay, though? So, I don't know space's sexual orientation. And how can you know, right? Like how do you know if space is into you or not? That's a tricky one. But why is it fake? Do you mean fake? It's putting on airs, it's not really showing us its true intentions, that it is hiding its more darker, malevolent intentions for us as a planet. I kind of get from space that it is cold and unfeeling and doesn't really care at all about us. It feels like it's being very truthful and honest with us about that we are just an insignificant nothing compared to space, and it doesn't care at all about us. That's how it's treating us. But if you're saying that that's fake, does it actually hate us? And it's just trying to be indifferent to us? Or are you saying it's kind of into us? Well, that's interesting. I never thought about that. So you might be onto something. Oh, that would have been a good question. What are space's pronouns? Oh, if I had more time, I'd come up with something funny. Chiron, what are some sci-fi themes or stories that you would like to see to be written? Man, this is so tough because there are incredible science fiction stories that have yet to be adapted. The fact that we've seen how well The Martian and Project Hail Mary have gone off, I would suspect that if anybody actually makes a version of We Are Legion, I Am Bob, the Bobiverse books, they'll do very well. Someone pick up that IP. Come on, get on it, because it's of a very similar genre, and I think has lots of humor, cool ideas. I think it'll go really well. But the amount of science fiction books out there is just bottomless. There are so many incredible science fiction books that have been written. I think about a lot of the work by Neil Stephenson. some of it was probably unfilmable is maybe the problem. William Gibson, Isaac Asimov. You know, some Isaac Asimov stuff has been done. Obviously, we've seen The Foundation. There was I, Robot, Bicentennial Man. So some of it has been hit or miss. But I think there's this kind of more modern age where directors are getting, good directors are getting their hands on beloved pieces of science fiction and doing a good job. And so I have faith, but there's almost too much of it. And instead the movie industry is doing very formulaic. Let's make a sequel to Star Wars. Let's make a sequel to Avengers. And, I've been ranting and railing against this for years now, that that we don't want more, or maybe we do, but the movie studios, they spend so much money making a movie that it has to be a hit. And so they go for an established intellectual property. They go for the sequel. They go for a known piece of intellectual property, as opposed to taking a risk on something that is new and weird and different and interesting, and maybe has a cult following, but maybe doesn't, maybe came out of nowhere. And yet some of the best sci-fi movies have come from them picking up some story. Like, think about Edge of Tomorrow, right? The Tom Cruise movie. That was great. What a great movie. It's probably in my top 10. I really liked it. And it is a adaptation of a Japanese novel called All You Need Is Kill. I think it was called. I read it in English. And yet they were able to turn it into a really great movie. Very different from the book, and yet had some of the sort of core ideas, and they were able to make it come together. So, man, there are so many sci-fi books, and I love them to just try. Like, just take a crack at it. Spend a few tens of millions, maybe 100 million, try to make a movie out of Revelation Space or of the Culture series or whatever. Give it a try, as opposed to make another sequel or reboot an old movie that is 30 years old. Like, please stop. Save that money. Spend it on trying experiments. Yeah, superhero fatigue. I have total superhero fatigue at this point. It's got to be really weird and different. Of course, I enjoyed Wonder Man, and it was a superhero movie, and Invincible, season 4 of Invincible is happening right now, and that is easily in my top 10 favorite television shows. So what are you going to do? Dougal, do you still visit your Discord server? No, I don't. I think Anton does. Rail Cohen, what telescope do you own? So I own 5 telescopes. So 3 of them are behind me. So this is the newest edition. This is the Dwarf Mini. And it's a tiny little smart telescope. And it is awesome. Relatively inexpensive. All in one. Everything you need for a smart telescope. And yet it does the job. I've taken pictures of the Orion Nebula with it. It's amazing. So that's the newest one. And they sent me a copy of this one. So I didn't pay for the Dwarf Mini. And then I've got my Sea Star there, which I bought with my own money, and that's it's my second favorite now. And then that is the Vaonis Vespera 2, but it's clear plastic, and it's the best smart telescope. Well, I guess it's the second best smart telescope because I'm actually building my own smart telescope. And then I have I'll go grab it, just so I've got it in seed. Hold on one second. this is my new telescope. There, you can see it. All right, so you can see it there. So that is a this is actually an older telescope. This is a Stellar View 70 that was given to me like 10 years ago. And then I just recently bought a new camera for it, a new color camera. And then people will recognize the red mount. That's a ZWO harmonic drive mount. And that's a really fancy mount. But I've essentially built my own smart telescope. So I built my own version of the C-Star and the Vespera. And I've worked with Claude, developed an interface for it so that you can actually live stream and auto stack images of the night sky in the kind of the same way that the C-Star and the Vespera and stuff work. But I have total control over the connection to the telescope. So that's cool. And I just really need clear skies. I've only had like 2 clear nights since I built this thing. And then the last telescope that I have is I have an 8-inch Dobsonian telescope, which has been behind me in some shots. And it is sitting outside, and it's the one that we pull out. Like, I'll pull it out tonight actually, because we've got a nice moon. Jupiter is up really high. It's the perfect telescope for just quickly looking at something in the sky. So yeah. My recommendation always is start with a pair of binoculars. So I have a pair of Celestron Skymaster binoculars. They are excellent, and they're not that expensive. Like, you can get a nice pair of binoculars for $100, and that will take you very far. Like, we still use those binoculars almost every single day. I use them today to look for ducks in our pond, but I will also use them to look at the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules or the Orion Nebula with these binoculars. So start with binoculars, then get a Dobsonian if you want something that's sort of like a better telescope. You can pick up a 6-inch Dobsonian on Facebook Marketplace usually for $200, and it's going to be like a really useful light bucket. You'll be able to use it for your whole life. Mine, the 8-inch, I paid $550 for it, Canadian, which, is $400 US ish. And I've just picked it up on Facebook Marketplace. And in fact, there's another one for sale in my town. So for the same price. So they come up from time to time. Jimmy James, what happened to the other time zone live stream? So what happened was, I was trying to keep my evenings available so that I could use the telescope, work on the telescope. And so I've been shifting to doing the 5 o'clock on Mondays live streams, but I will get back into shifting the live streams. I wonder if it was very effective or if it was just confusing. I wanted to give people at different time zones a chance to participate in the live event. But I also know that people kind of appreciate just things to be regular and normal. And so switching them around was hard for people to keep track of it. And I don't know what the answer to this is. Do I just do 3 live streams every Monday? One at 8 a.m., one at 5 o'clock, and then one at 10 o'clock at night? I don't know what to do. You tell me, because that would kill me, but it would be cool. Whoa, it's like some big conversation about something happening in the U.S. Okay. James Yen, just noticed the Quest 3 back there. What kind of games do you play on it? None. I don't love it. Um, my wife and I got Quest 3s. She plays with hers more. I mostly just, it's not that I don't love the Quest. And I have a bunch of games. I signed up for you can get this sort of free game unlock every month. And I signed up for that, which gave me, I did a year of that. And so now I've got like 30 games for the Quest 3, but I just love my Steam Deck. So I just play on my Steam Deck all the time. And so it's not that I don't like the Quest 3, it's that I just love the Steam Deck so much that if I have time to play video games, the thing I'm doing is sitting on the couch playing on the Steam Deck. And it's weird, like the Steam machine is going to come out this year, and I'm definitely buying a Steam machine, but I suspect I won't use it very much. Or maybe I'll live stream from the Steam machine to my Steam Deck so that it just has better graphics for it. And then I will probably get the Steam Frame, which is the VR, but I probably am still just going to play on my Steam Deck. It's just the perfect thing. Put up a vote for times for streams on the community page. That's interesting. That's an interesting question. Like I had assumed that doing one at 8 a.m. for me, which is early evening for people in Europe, but maybe I can figure out 2 streams that will cover most people's time zones. That's a really good idea. We'll talk about that and see if we can come up with a solution that works for me. The one that's really hard for me is the Sunday nights at 10 o'clock at night. I'm just shattered at that point. And like I am usually in bed and asleep just after 9 o'clock, which I know, total old man at this point. And I wake up at like 4:30 or 5 in the morning. And I just I can't, no matter what time I go to bed, I wake up at 5 in the morning. That's just being an old man. And so if I go to bed at midnight, then I wake up at 5 in the morning, and then I'm like sleep deprived. So it's not a good solution for my brain. The 8 a.m. one, I'm raring to go. Like right now, I'm kind of a little, it's the end of my workday. I'm run down, but when I do my live streams at 8 in the morning, I am much zippier. So I don't know what the answer is. Yeah. Tricky Mick, have you thought about live streaming on Twitch or other platforms to give you a wider audience? Yeah. Twitch actually, I mean, it can give you a wider audience, but Twitch isn't a very good place for audience discovery. Like there is nothing as good as YouTube. YouTube is the best of the best of the best. So there are plugins and I can probably there's a multi-stream setup for OBS, so I can make it stream out to Twitch and Facebook and I don't know, various other live streams at the same time. But then you have all of the comments, right? So how do I manage all the comments coming in on Twitch and all the comments coming in on Patreon and the comments coming in on YouTube all at the same time and be able to integrate those into a single experience? So it's like another headache. And YouTube is pretty great. For all of my complaints about YouTube is the best. They know it. I know it. They know I'm not going anywhere. TikTok. Yeah. Erwin, transpirational cooling better than heat shield. When SpaceX lands a rocket, they fight fire with fire to cool the engine when entering the atmosphere prior to a touchdown propulsive landing. So I did an interview about transpirational cooling. So you should watch that if you haven't already seen that interview. It's a very cool technology. The gist is that you are putting droplets of liquid on the outside of the spacecraft, and then it is taking heat away from the spacecraft. And it's a very efficient way, but it is very complicated because you need to have all of these little holes on the outside of your spacecraft that this liquid can go out of. and that the liquid can actually be the same stuff that you use as fuel. So you can kind of keep the plumbing relatively simple. So it's a very cool idea, but has a ton of engineering challenges. But people are working on this as a potential solution. And this has been used for other technologies. So theoretically, it can be worked out. It's very cool. Yeah. So your spacecraft is sweating essentially. Frosty Winnipeg, is YouTube the only one that pays? No, Twitch pays. YouTube pays. Patreon, pays indirectly. I don't know if TikTok pays. I don't think Facebook pays anymore. I think they are sick and tired of the video live streaming. But YouTube is definitely the best. I guess there's like people on Twitch that say that it pays better. And I am a partner on Twitch, which I guess they said, hey, do you want to be a partner on Twitch? And I said, okay. And I just never bothered doing the live stream. So I really should. But it's just like, it's another thing. It's another thing to deal with. And I just don't want to. Yeah, I don't think, did I even put ads in this episode? Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I think we've reached the end of our time here together. So I'm going to start to wrap things up. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with me on this always super entertaining live question show. Thanks in advance to Chad, Anton, anyone else who's going to have to work and edit this nonsense. You've got your work cut out for you. What's coming up? So we've got a lot of interviews in the pipeline right now. We've got 3 for sure just sitting on the server ready to go, and a couple more after that. So we're going to do 2 to 3 interview releases every week for the next couple of weeks until we've cleared through that backlog. The Lunar and Planetary Science Conference is going to be happening. There's a ton of really interesting science coming out of that. And we should be getting NIAC any day now. So I'm probably going to have to do a whole bunch of NIAC interviews. So all right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Oh, and thanks to Arjone. And thanks to Zapfan for keeping the peace.